Let's talk about stimulus discrimination. When you hear discrimination, think of the difference between things, the difference between two or more things. If we can discriminate between stimuli, we know how to respond based on what we're given, based on the environment that we're in. We're in the library versus at a party. We know how to adjust our behavior to fit those settings. We've discriminated the difference between those stimuli. Key exam phrase might be differential responding to different stimuli. Look for only when or but not when, different responses. So difference between contrasting conditions. SD versus S delta. So SD is available, S delta is not available. Open sign, closed sign. Look for in the presence of this setting, but not this setting, discriminating, understanding how to behave or how to respond, understanding the difference between stimuli. For example, a child asks for help from a teacher, but not a peer. If they don't often get help in the way that they need from a peer, they're going to ask the teacher. Clients using polite language with supervisors, but not with coworkers. That can happen. Person speaks loudly outdoors, but quietly in the library. For other test prep keywords, exam phrases, discrimination training process, differential reinforcement, reinforced behavior in the presence of the SD, extinction in the presence of the S delta. No reinforcement is given with other stimuli. Look for scenarios for discrimination questions with two or more different conditions. Check if the behavior is across different conditions. Identify which stimuli signals reinforcement for SD and which one does not signal reinforcement for S delta. Generalization is different from discrimination because discrimination is understanding the difference between things. Generalization is understanding how things are related. Differential reinforcement is how we establish stimulus control. We also use prompt fading, as I mentioned earlier, to transfer the control of stimuli. We gradually remove prompts to transfer that. So you can look for fading prompts, transferring control, natural cues when you're looking at stimulus control transfer. Look for moving from artificial to natural stimuli, fading picture prompts for verbal responses. There are complex discrimination examples. There are some that are multiple discrimination involving multiple SDs. You can look for depends on or complex conditions. So oftentimes this has two or more signals or two or more relationships, like touch red if it's a circle, touch blue if it's a square. So it's a more complex condition, kind of like solving a puzzle. There can be multiple discriminations to make. So even like these are animals, but which one is an animal? And you're given fruit and an animal, but also more specifically, which one is an animal and a mammal or a dog? The clinical applications for the exam focus, we're assessing stimulus control to try to identify current controlling stimuli and determine the strength of these. Then we can plan intervention and targets. If we're having an issue with our clients being able to respond to safety conditions, we want to work on that and figure out what is the stimuli that we want to signal to engaging in behavior safety and which ones are not. So a lot of negative teaching examples. When we talk about generalization next week, we'll talk about the 7 ways to promote generalization. We also talk about establishing instructor control or instructional control. And what that means is we're creating an environment that is conducive to learning and benefits the learner. So we have a safe environment with a lot of motivating factors. We also want to build that relationship and that rapport so that they trust us and that we can have an appropriate teaching environment. So it's very relaxed, that our clients happy, relaxed, and engaged. That means that we have great instructional control if we have a balance of what's expected and what in the environment is preferred. For this practice question, a behavior analyst is working with a 7-year-old client who consistently raises her hand and waits to be called on before speaking during structured academic activities. However, during free play and lunch, the same child interrupts conversations and speaks without permission. This scenario best demonstrates what? This is strong stimulus control by academic versus non-academic context. So the student has learned that for appropriate hand-raising behaviors, this is going to be the appropriate behavior to engage in while free play and lunch contexts function as a different stimuli and do not evoke the same response. A behavior analyst is teaching a child appropriate voice volume in a different setting. The child learns to speak quietly in the library and praised for doing so, but to use a normal voice volume in the cafeteria, where quiet voice is not reinforced. After training, the child consistently speaks quietly in the library but uses normal volume in the cafeteria. This training best demonstrates what? There's stimulus generalization, or discrimination training. Also response generalization or weak stimulus control. The answer is C, discrimination training for contextually appropriate behaviors. And for this, it's because the child has learned how to respond differently in different environmental contexts. A teacher initially uses hand gestures to prompt a student to raise their hand before speaking. Over several weeks, the teacher gradually reduces the gesture prompt while maintaining reinforcement for the appropriate hand raising. Eventually, the student raises their hand before speaking without any gestural prompts. What is this an example of? So pause if you want to read through it. The answer is B, stimulus controlled transfer. We're transferring from the cues and prompts to just raising the hand without any prompts. We were able to review stimulus and discrimination concepts as well as go through some practice exam questions. I hope that the test tips also helped with keywords to look for in the exam. Make sure to subscribe, comment below if you have any other questions or would like any further scenario examples. Thanks for watching. See you next time.